Today on Bible Divas, you've got me, Jennifer Bashaw, Professor of New Testament, and Cynthia Schaefer-Elliott, Professor of Hebrew Bible.
Our guest is Dr. Alicia Myers, who currently works as an associate professor of New Testament studies at Baylor University. Her research focuses on the Gospel of John. We'll talk about gender and embodiment. She also works on the Catholic epistles, cultural memory, and social trauma. Her most recent book, and she's got loads of books, but her most recent book, The Theology of the Gospel of John, applies a narrative approach to the Gospel's theology to explore John's unique rhetorical goals. And we're going to talk a lot about that in our discussion today.
We hope you enjoyed this conversation with Dr. Alicia Myers.
Welcome to Bible Divas, a podcast from Baptist News Global, where four women Bible scholars bring curiosity, expertise, and a healthy dose of sass to conversations about Scripture. Whether you're certain, skeptical, deconstructing, reconstructing, or just curious, pull up a chair. The Bible Divas challenge assumptions, explore new perspectives, share a few laughs, and discover why this ancient book still matters today.
Welcome to the Bible Divas podcast, where women biblical scholars bring the academy to your earbuds.
Today we have our friend, Dr. Alicia Myers. Welcome, Alicia.
Hi, thank you for having me.
We're so excited to have you here. Because our listeners need to know that we are also really good friends with you. I have been best friends with you for a long time. So
since we met in San Antonio in 2016.
That's right. Yes. So I'm very happy to see you today. Our first question we ask everybody actually is, what drew you to biblical studies and inspired you to pursue studying the Bible as a career?
I think everybody, well, I don't know about guys, but I think most women I talk to in this field, we always have some sort of like circuitous weird story. I didn't know the job Bible professor in any way existed. So I wasn't raised in like a tightly religious household. I started going to church in high school, which is its own sort of weird story that maybe we could get into. But I went to college thinking I'd be a youth pastor. I don't know. That's really funny. And then I took a class on biblical interpretation, and I was like, oh, wait, people do this? So you could do history, right? Literature, like literary analysis and study. And it was the Bible, which I was very much interested in. And I was like, well, this seems like way more fun than trying to figure out like games with toilet paper rolls. So like, it's not my style. So I'm just really not good at that part. So I shifted into that. And then, I just decided I was going to do it. And because I wasn't raised like in a really conservative setting, and like the women in my family are amazing. And so I never thought, oh, there's something women can't do. Like I went to college and realized that some Christians didn't think women could do things. And I was like, well, that's obviously false. So it was a bit different of an experience. So I didn't have like any women Bible faculty in undergrad, but just really didn't, who cares? Like I just decided I was going to do this. And that's it. I kind of just marched straight through, and I worked really hard, but I was lucky, like all of us who end up getting a job in the field are. And here I am. I just kind of my personality. I just kind of keep plowing. I just keep going forward. And I'm pretty stubborn, so I just kept going.
It wasn't luck involved, but you are super competent, the most competent Bible scholar I know. So I'm pretty sure.
But I guess I just meant like you can't control what jobs are open when you're graduating,
Right. That's
like either there is a job that you will fit or there's not. And there's really, like y'all been in the hiring process now. There's so much stuff happening on the other side of a hiring, like in the committee or in a department, that the candidates cannot know. And so I guess I don't want to be over here being like, well, I just worked really hard and I did it all myself. I know that that's absolutely not true. I had good community around me. And like, yeah, there were people who did not think I should be doing this, but I just really didn't care what they had to say. Had to say. It just kept going.
Can I ask a follow-up question to that? You
Yeah.
mentioned you didn't have any female
Mm-mm.
Bible professors. What about your master's and PhD programs?
So I went to Duke for I got an MTS, which is a master's in theological studies, which is basically an MDiv without any of the like, here's how to run a church. It's shorter because I knew I wasn't called to be in a church setting. Because I had done some ministry in undergrad and was like, this is not where I'm supposed to be. Um, and at Duke, Ellen Davis was my Hebrew professor, and like she made it really hard for me to choose, do I do Hebrew Bible or do I do New Testament? So my like way around that
Good
was
for
to study,
Ellen.
yeah, I know, to study how the Old Testament is used in the New, because I was like, well, this becomes the most encompassing. But um, she is a fantastic teacher. And she has ability to make something that's really complex. She didn't, sometimes people teach a language course like a weed out course, and that is not, she taught very invitationally, which is when I was teaching Greek at Campbell, I was like, everybody's scared enough to be in the room. Like it took enough guts to sign up for the class. So let's make this an invitational space. So I learned that from her. I had Amy Laura Hall. There weren't a lot of women because my program was at that time, I think it was 60 hours. And since I had chosen biblical studies as a concentration, and then I kind of landed on New Testament. And at the time, Susan Eastman was the only New Testament. And I'm putting this in quotation marks because it wasn't technically her title at the time. Like she was a professor of like Christian education. It's really weird because those of you who don't know her name, she is an outstanding, internationally renowned Paul scholar, and she was when I was a student there, even though I didn't know that at the time. But yeah, so and I never got to take a class with her. So I think yeah, it was really only two. I think I had two classes, and then I went to PhD program, and Sharon Dowd was here when I first started, and so I had a class with Sharon. Who passed away this past year, but Sharon Dowd is amazing and introduced me to Helen Barrett Montgomery, which we can talk about at some point if we want. And Beth Allison Barr took a class with Beth on women in early Christianity. And then I had a class with Lydia Novakovich. So Lydia is wonderful and absolutely brilliant, and she intimidates people, but when Lydia gives you feedback, it's because she believes in you. And so I try to, like, she is brilliant. If you read anything that she writes, she is extremely thorough, and yeah, she was very encouraging for me because she would challenge me, which I appreciated that. I knew I wasn't being just like, oh, whatever, we don't care about you. She cared, and that's how she showed me she cared.
Wow, great. Well, thanks for indulging me on that
Yeah.
question. That follow-up question wasn't on our list of things to ask, but since you brought it up, I thought, oh, I want to ask more about that. So your most recent book, if I could switch gears a little bit, your most recent book on a narrative approach to the Gospel of John. Could you describe for our listeners what is a narrative approach to biblical interpretation, and maybe use the Gospel of John to illustrate what that could look like?
Yeah. So I mostly write on the Gospel and letters of John. So the most recent book is Theology of the Gospel of John, and it's a title in the series. So they called it The Theology of the Gospel of John, but I don't think this is this is my understanding of some of the theological parts of the Gospel of John. But what I mean by taking a narrative approach to it is I'm reading the text in its what we call final form. So the final form of the text is as I'm using it, the form that is behind most of the English translations of the New Testament that we have today. So when I follow the gospel then in this book, it's going to sound familiar to you if you've read the gospel. I'm going to follow it beginning, middle, ends. I'm going to look at how then as a whole story, which is just what narrative means, how are the different characters presented? How are they developed? What do we learn from them? What are other, I mean, it's like, English class where you're like, what is the narrative setting in this moment? What is the narrative time? What is the location? So John loves to set something during a Jewish festival. So learning about that festival will help you understand the conflict that Jesus will inevitably cause during the festival, because usually what he says has some connection to what the festival is commemorating. So we'll look at that. That's really narrative approach.
Take a big picture view, because I bet you a lot of our listeners maybe aren't used to thinking about the gospel separately. So, I've noticed in churches, people put all the gospels together in their head. There's this one harmonized story about Jesus, right? But that is not what we scholars tend to do, right? So I would love for you to tell our audience a little bit more about why it is important to study the four gospels as separate portraits of Jesus. And then maybe at the end of that, you can talk about what makes John's presentation a little bit different than the others.
Okay. Well, they're all written separately. So gosh, it's like I tell my students, when you gather around and you're remembering somebody in your family, somebody who is very impactful in your family story. And you may have similarities in your story. Like you may have all been present when they did this crazy thing at the last wedding we all had together, whatever, right? But my bet is you're going to have slightly different versions of that story. And depending on your understanding of that person, certain memories will be shaped and triggered in your recalling. So the example I always like to use is my dad's mom. So she was a nurse epidemiologist. She was a head nurse at the University of Iowa. Her name's Dorothy Raisley. She was amazing. She did all these she got a loan in her name to buy a house in Iowa City, and she's the first woman who ever did that. So for me, my grandma's a badass. Like she gets stuff done, but she was also hilarious, and she was 6'2", and so she was like, "I'm big, deal with it," And so when I remember her, the stories that point to that aspect of her personality are the stories that stand out to me, or the way that I describe her. Those are the things that stand out to me. But my dad, he sees those things, but he also saw other sides of her too, right? And knew her when she was younger, and was in different places with her. So it's kind of like that. If you think, even if I've got recollections from people who are with Jesus, they're going to hear different things when he tells a parable. Like if you do go to church, talk to somebody about what this sermon was about afterward. And then talk to the person who preached, see what she says, right? Like, you don't really, you get different glimpses. So the four gospels are four versions of Jesus's life story told by at least four different people, but how are they receiving the traditions that they're recording, right? So if my children were to write a story of their great grandma Raisley, they have to compile a bunch of source material and go talk to people. And then maybe they'll do some research on their own to bring a story together, right? And that's more what we have in these gospels. And so if I really want to know what is the person we call Mark's understanding of Jesus, I need to read Mark. I need to read it from beginning to end. I need to let it be its own story, right? And then I need to do that with each of the gospels. And once I've done that with each of the gospels, then I can see, oh, these things are really similar between them. So there must be that was a really impactful thing that Jesus said or did, showed up all the time. And then, oh gosh, this thing's unique. Why is Mark highlighting this? What do I learn about Jesus from this that I don't learn in the other gospels? So when I approach them, I'm less doing classical, what we call historical Jesus work, what did Jesus really say? I don't know. He spoke Aramaic and Like I wasn't there. I have to rely on other people's accounts. And we're way more concerned with like getting things verbatim than anybody in the ancient world ever could have been. They aren't flipping out an iPhone and recording Jesus's Sermon on the Mount, right? So I want to pay attention to what's different as well. So I get what is the truth that Mark sees about Jesus that maybe Luke doesn't? And what does Luke bring out that Mark doesn't? And same with Matthew and same with John. And then when I put those stories together, I get a more holistic understanding of Jesus, right? And then I shouldn't even stop there because like there's letters that show different thoughts about who Jesus is. And like Paul's letters are written before the Gospels. And I would even go to Christian apocryphal writings outside of the New Testament because there's still like memories of Jesus being pulled forward. So I think there's more to learn if we don't just try to mash them up and smooth it out. We're missing
My favorite part of gospel studies. I just love it to get into what is Mark's picture of this? What does Mark think about this? And then compare it to John. Speaking of comparing it to John, how would you talk about John's unique portrait of Jesus? Maybe that's the best way to say it.
Yeah, I think John's written last. I do think John, at the very least, has Mark. There's a growing consensus that that John probably has all the Gospels. I'm a little more stubborn on all this stuff till I read everything. And I'm in the midst of reading on this now. I definitely think John has Mark. I think there's good reason to think he's got parts or Luke. I'm working on Matthew. There's some things I still need some work on that. It should be said, most scholars in Europe and continental Europe have thought that, of course, John has all of the Gospels. It's just the Americans and the Brits who are like, oh, no. Anyway, that's all a whole other thing. But John's version of Jesus is the most obviously divine. And as a result, John's Jesus is he's not a cuddly guy, which is it's weird, honestly, that we recommend new Christians go read John and certainly read John by themselves. I don't think any Christian should just be sent off and like, read a gospel, know Jesus by yourself, because they're ancient texts and they're confusing. But John is super confusing. I mean, the whole thing starts, right? In the beginning was the Word of God. You're like, well, what's that? What's that? It's already abstract. And usually Jesus and John, because the thing is, in the Gospel of John, Jesus knows that he's God in flesh. He's God's will. By God's word, he's God's desire, God's logic, God's organizing principle, God's wisdom as the person Jesus. So just, what does that feel like when that guy shows up to your party? Right? Like,
yeah.
What is he like at the party? And that's basically what you find over and over again is people like trying to figure out, this dude looks like a regular guy from Galilee, artisan class, maybe. We don't really get a lot of that in John, but he's, people say they know his parents and things. Like he says some crazy stuff. And then he doesn't do as many miracles, but he still does them. He's not super flashy about it. It's kind of off stage. And then he talks about it for chapters and chapters. And if you don't understand him, he's not like, oh, Cynthia, here, I know I'm making this a little complicated or maybe even a little offensive. Let me make it nicer for you. No, he like doubles down, right? So it's John where he's like, I am the manna. I am the bread from heaven. I am the manna that God is giving you now. And if you eat me, you will live forever. And everyone's like, I don't know, Jesus, this sermon's gone a little weird to me. And he's like, oh, okay. What I mean is, if you chomp on my flesh and chew it and gnaw it like an animal gnaws on a carcass so that you're consuming the flesh and also drinking the blood at the same time, you're going to have eternal life. Cool?
So he doesn't make it better. He makes it worse.
He makes it worse. So he just does that over and over again. So it's just this contrast of like, if somebody knows that they are God, living in a world where no one else knows that they're God because they're a person and they can't understand it. So the whole thing is just on two different levels, like ships in the night. So I understand why people think Jesus is crazy and John, because I feel like if he showed up at my house and started saying these things, right? Like I'm calling the authorities. This person doesn't seem safe to me. But then that's John's point, because he wants to say, this is this amazing thing. And what God has done in sending Jesus as God's son is to show you complete divine revelation, but you can't understand it on your own. Like you're going to need help. You're going to fail at trying to figure it out at first. There is necessary work that has to be done through the crucifixion and the resurrection and the giving of the Holy Spirit for you to understand this. Because I don't care who you are, Jesus doesn't. Even his disciples think he sounded a little off in John. So I'll have this essay will be out, I don't know, next year sometime. But we're like, I really think Jesus basically is trying to see if he can offend people away from him in John. Like, if I can offend you, right?
Yeah, that's why I think what you said about why do people give the Gospel of John to new Christians is so right. What you said is so right. Let's change that.
Yes. My son was like starting to read the New Testament, and he's like, well, where should I, I'm just going to start at Matthew. And I'm like, I mean, you can. You're not Jewish, though, so there's going to be a lot of stuff that you don't understand. Like, start with Luke. He did not, but that's always my suggestion, because I'm like, well, most Christians are non-Jewish heritage, so there's a lot of things we're not going to catch. But I think Luke is easier for us, and it has a more complete narrative than like Mark. That's where I'd start, but I'd still just don't read your Bible alone. Don't read it totally alone.
That's a good advice. So now that you've talked to us a little bit about John, the gospel according to John, maybe you could get into a bit more of the gospel of John's connection, if there is any, to the other letters that have the name John attached to it.
Yeah.
So how have scholars suggested that these Johannine letters relate to the gospel? And then what is your take on it?
Mm-hmm. So this is where my more current work is shifting. I'm always writing on the Gospel of John, but I'm writing a couple things on the letters right now. So I'm writing a little book called in the New Word Biblical Theme series, which is a Zondervan series. But I'm writing the one on 1st through 3rd John, and then for the Wisdom Commentary series, which is a feminist commentary series from Liturgical Press, I'm writing that volume on the letters of John. So I'm spending a ton of time there right now. And how I start the little one, the New Word Biblical Themes, is starting like, well, what's the Johannine literature? Like, Johannine's just the adjective form for John. So John things is all it means. So there's a collection of John writings. And it's the Gospel of John, 1st, 2nd, 3rd John, and the book of Revelation. So they all sort of get thrown together for some complicated reasons in Christian tradition, and like different leaders trying to say what's authoritative and what's not, which is fun. So people who think the book of Revelation should be scripture will tie it to John, son of Zebedee, and to the Gospel of John, because the Gospel of John's already accepted, right? So it's complicated. Alan Culpepper has it's an older book on John of Zebedee, if anybody's really interested, where he goes through like, here's all the ways that John of Zebedee gets developed in church tradition. It's really helpful. But leaving Revelation aside for a moment, because it's its own thing, the letters, I think, are definitely related to the gospel. 1st John is like an expansion of Jesus's last night with his disciples before he's arrested. So in the Gospel of John, from chapter 13 to chapter 17, Jesus is with his disciples. He's going to tell Judas to leave. And then he has a long speech that's really just him and his disciples, where he's like, here's here's what you're going to experience after I'm gone. And it's going to be really hard, but you're going to be okay, is really what it is. And in that speech over and over again, he's like, you all need to love one another. I know that you love me if you love one another. Like, it's just what he keeps telling them. And so if you read First John, it's just that developed seemingly for like a later audience that is like, oh, okay, general advice from Jesus is great, but like, what do we do when stuff actually starts happening and people start disagreeing with what loving one another looks like? So I think First John is picking up on some loose threads, probably from the gospel, whether or not it's a real group of people or just somebody's imaginative situation. Like, it's meant to be, here's how we apply Jesus's teaching now. I think Second and Third John are written later. John Painter suggested that like Second and Third John were like basically cover letters that went with First John, which I find really fascinating, but I have no manuscript evidence. And partly I don't have any manuscript evidence of it because I don't have a full version of Second John, like in third, I don't have a full version of these things until much later. So I just don't have early fragments. So maybe, but unfortunately, Third John doesn't come running around in full form until a lot later. To like, I don't get references of it until the 3rd century. So, yeah. And then the earliest full version I have of these are 4th century. That's 300s, guys. So it's a mess. So I think that probably the author of Second John has First John because there's some really close connections between the two of them. But Second John's so short. It's just a few verses. And Third John's short. But Third John seems to be its own little thing. Like, if you go read Third John now, you're going to be like, why is this? I'm not sure why this is in here. It's in there because it got attached to Second John, which was already attached to First John. I'm really glad it's in there, though, because it's weird.
Absolutely. So we all know that you're a John scholar, but like, you are more than a John scholar. You have lots of writings. And if I were to have to pick my favorite thing that you've written, which it's hard because you have some great books, but I would probably say your Blessed Among Women, ? Mothers and Motherhood in the New Testament is my favorite. And part of the reason is that you did this research into the Greco-Roman ideas of women and their bodies. And that was so fascinating to me. Some of the things that were in that book are jaw-dropping, right? And so I would love for you to share with our audience what are some of the things, maybe the most bizarre things or the most exciting things that you learned in your study, and how does that help illuminate the way that mothers are portrayed in the New Testament?
Yeah. So I wrote this was my second book, and it was the book you kind of find when you're writing your dissertation, but you're like, I got to write my dissertation, and I'm not going to write this book. And I knew certain members of my committee would not be thrilled with this book, and I wanted to write it in my own voice. I didn't want to like have to change it. So that's probably the book I had the most fun writing. It's with Oxford University Press, so it's not like in a church press. So it's not. I would write it differently if I were going to write it for like an Erdman's or a Baker. So it may come. The tone might sound different than some of your listeners might expect, because I'm just going to kind of report the stuff and not like try to make it make sense for a church context. I would say
it's
that.
Still readable. I mean, it's still very readable. Yeah.
Yeah. I really had a lot of fun with it because I just felt no pressure.
Good. Yeah.
But I was reading John 2, is actually in Beth Barr's class. And I was like, Jesus is weird to his mom here. He's like, what's between you and me, woman? And I see all the commentators being like, well, Jesus he's not being mean or anything, right? But he's not being nice. So that was my first thought of like, well, what do ancient people think about mothers, and how do they understand motherhood, and what do they think the relationship between mothers and children are, or whatever? And honestly, this eventually took me down the lens of ancient medical texts, because I'm like, what do mothers do like with their bodies? Like, how are they related physically to the child? And so I read a whole bunch of stuff about how ancient, and these are all men, right? Ancient medical authors, the Hippocratics, Serranus, a bunch of guys, Aristotle. What are they saying about what women's bodies are? Like, what do they think women's bodies are made of? How do they work? What the heck do they think a womb is? And then how does that impact, like how they construct a woman's body directly reflects what they've already assumed about women, which is that they're passive, receptive, soft, squishy, leaky. Leaky meaning like because you menstruate all the time, which must mean you're dysregulated because you just take everything in around you and then you react, right? So like women are so emotional, and like these things are still absolutely pertinent to our own context, which was also like, oh, this is so sad. Like we're still here. But no, they think you have a period if you're a woman because literally your body is porous and you're absorbing extra fluid in the air around you. And then every month your body has to release that in menstruation. Yeah. And if you don't, your womb might suffocate you and die. Right. So like there's a ton of work on it in these contexts, but I had never found in New Testament context anybody reading, well, people don't talk about women a whole lot, especially when I was earlier in my career. And they certainly weren't looking at like how do ancient people understand what's happening during sex. That was really uncomfortable. How are babies conceived? What happens as a child is growing in the womb? So I went and read a bunch of classicists as well, like Helen King. She's amazing. Rebecca Fleming. There's a whole lot more. And I learned about breast milk. So if you read the New Testament, it's full of like milk analogies. Like Paul's like, you shouldn't need milk anymore, but here I am giving you more milk. I was like, well, what do they think breast milk is? They're not, buying 2% over at the grocery store. And that was, they think breast milk is like inseminated leftovers of what formed a baby, literally pressed up into a woman's breast. And that's what a baby is drinking. And so whatever seeds formed you while you were in the womb is still forming you while you're drinking, ideally at your mother's breast, so that you're still being formed by the same stuff, basically. But you can't do that for too long because then you'll be squishy, and you don't want to be squishy like a woman. So it's super fascinating, and it was fun. Yeah. So then I just took all that stuff and I said, okay, so where do I have mother characters in the New Testament? I can't do them all. Which ones am I going to pick on to do? So obviously I wrote on Mary, but it also helped me look at like maternal presentations of Jesus. He's very maternal in John at points. It's complicated. And then like Paul or the author of Hebrews or First Peter, where they use these analogies, even though they're like, Paul's not a woman. So what does it mean that Paul describes himself as a woman? Which I don't know about y'all, but like when I was I want to say like earlier feminist Christian context, it was like, Paul calls himself a woman, so that must mean it's good to be a woman. Right? Mm-hmm. Anybody heard that?
Yep.
And I was like, but I don't think I need a man telling me it's okay to be a woman for it be okay for me to be a woman. And actually, Paul, by the time I wrote this book, I'd had 2 babies. And so when Paul's like, I'm in the pains of labor again for you in Galatians 4, I'm like, no, you're not. You've never even done it once. It's very painful. And when Jesus is in John 16, oh, after the woman has given birth, she doesn't remember it anymore. I'm like, yes, she does. She absolutely does, Jesus. So it just changed that. It made me want to go look at those passages more and also deal with like, what does it mean that in a variety of Christian contexts, we've needed some sort of man's validation of our own experiences for it to be valuable, instead of us just being like, no, like, this is our experience. And as living beings, our experience is valuable. As humans, our lived experience is as valuable as a man's lived experience and is real. And maybe you could learn more about God by also listening to women and their experiences. So that's kind of where that book took me.
And I highly recommend it. So check it out. Blessed among women, question mark?
The breast milk chapter is the best chapter.
It is a very good chapter,
Yeah.
yes. Okay, so I've already said this, but we worked together for several years at Campbell University. I don't know if I've told you this before, but having another woman New Testament scholar as a colleague and friend has been one of the highlights of my career because never had that before I had you. Because our field is dominated by men. I mean, I shouldn't have to say that. I think people know that, but I'll say it again. Our field is dominated by men. But I'd love for you to share some of your experiences that you had as a woman in the field of biblical studies. And I'm asking for the good and the bad. Like, don't censor yourself. Like, what are the challenges that you have faced? And then, how do your experiences impact the way that you study and show up as a Bible scholar?
Yeah. So Jennifer, you were also my first woman who was in New Testament, who was also a colleague. So when I first started at United Theological Seminary, there are other women on faculty, which was amazing. And I learned so much from them. But at Campbell, there was a woman. So I taught in the divinity school, which is like preparing pastors and ministers, graduate school master's level. And then Jennifer teaches the undergrads. Though I will tell you, Jennifer also taught Greek this past spring and she killed it. So for the master's students. But yeah, that was the first time I had actually a woman also teaching New Testament, which was phenomenal. There was a church historian, a Baptist historian there, Lydia Hoyle, when I was there, but just not the same field. So while we could support each other in some ways, we're just doing completely different things. Let's see, experiences. It is mixed. So when I first started, I mean, I don't know how when you first start going to Society of Biblical Literature meetings, you're like, oh, there's three women in this room.
Right.
3 women, no women of color in this. Everybody's white in this. Oh, there's one black man in this room. Hey, like it still is dominant white men. And like last year, so we call them manels when the whole panel is men. I went to a manel last year and I was like, it's 2025. How is there a manel? What is happening? Because it just shouldn't be that way anymore. So that was intimidating, but again, I'm pretty stubborn, which I think helped. And also not having been brought up in a context that told me, really, you shouldn't be in this room. I had seen my grandmother was an ER surgical nurse, like in the room, like doing stuff. If I'm not here, you're in trouble. Like, so I didn't have that same problem. I did have to figure out how I wanted to show up in this space. So I had to think about my presentation in ways I don't think my male colleagues had to think about. Like, and I still have students ask, like, how do I dress when I go to the meeting? Because I want to dress nice. I want to dress nice enough that you'll listen to me, but I can't dress provocatively, whatever the heck that means. Like, because that's different for everybody. Like, so do I have to dress like a man, like more mannish? And how do I mean, it's dumb stuff. Like, how do I walk into this space? Like, and so I had to like think through those things. And I thought about them a lot more when I was younger, but I won't pretend that they're gone. I still think about how am I going to show up in this space, because it matters if people will even listen to you or not. By people, I generally mean the men, but I don't always. I've impacted me in ways like the bros cite bros. So there'll be times when I'm reading stuff and I'm like, oh, I know 5 women who have argued this point before and they're not cited. But this dude who just published his dissertation, and that's what we're going to cite here, like that has driven me nuts for a long, long time. And Joanne Brandt, who is a John scholar as well, she and I would talk about this. But that kind of gets to the other side. I found community of mostly women, but some men who are just like, we just don't want to play. Like I can play with you and that's fine, but I actually don't have to. And we can make our own life-giving communities. And I don't have to like perpetuate a system that privileges very particularized bodies and personalities over others. So that's been great, which is one reason why I'm so glad you guys are doing this, being like, we just do our own. So I like that. So I've found great community. The Blessed Among Women book, I would love to say it's made a huge impact, but it has a few words in its title that deeply limit its readership. These are women,
Yep.
Motherhood.
mothers, and motherhood,
That's right.
which means my readers are women. If anybody's reading it, it's women. So Wonka 2 stuff happened with that, where some guy will be like, oh, I decided, I contributed in this way. And I'm like, well, no, like, I mean, I know I published on that 9 years ago, and I know Dorothy Lee wrote on it 5 years prior, and right. But they're like, oh, I'm glad I made a difference in the world. I'm like, I mean, you do, but not in this way. So it's a mixed bag.
Yeah.
I guess.
Well, keep up the good work. Keep up the good fight.
Yeah.
You mentioned, this will be our last question for you. You mentioned a few of the things that you're working on now.
Yeah.
What are you working on currently? And do you have any recent publications that you would like to highlight?
I am working on stuff on the letters of John right now. None of that is out yet because I'm still writing it. The most recent thing is that as the Theology of the Gospel of John book with Cambridge from 2025. It's in a like re-upped series, so it's in, you can get it in paperback, and it's very like reasonably priced, especially so far as some of these books can go. Which, by the way, authors do not control the price of our books. The publishers control the price of our books. So please do not think we're all getting rich off the books. We're not.
Good word.
We're not. So that's the newest. I would say the most fun thing out of there is chapter 6, which is like how John presents atonement in the gospel. That was the most fun one to write in there. I have an article coming out in New Testament Studies soon on Jesus as a theophany in the Gospel of John, particularly in John 17, which is a prayer he prays. It's often called the high priestly prayer, but the prayer he prays before he's arrested.
Helen Barrett Montgomery, mention your work in here. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Helen Barrett Montgomery is a mid 19th century to early 20th century feminist leader. She wouldn't call herself a feminist, but she was. Feminist leader, Baptist leader in the United States. And she is all the complicated things you would expect from a white middle-class woman in this time period from the state of New York. But she translated the New Testament from Greek into English, and she'd done this on her own and for her own like teaching. She taught Sunday school forever, and she actually was licensed to preach, and she was president of the Northern Baptist Convention in the 1920s. So like, y'all, she's serious. But that's not all she did. She did a lot of like civic activism and stuff on education reform. And it's amazing to go read her stuff on education reform and be like, gosh, those seem like great ideas, Helen. And why aren't we still doing them? Like on the importance of like not just doing standardized tests. And it's funny because like Walter Rauschenbusch, he's a social gospel guy, and her would get into fights about it because he was like standardized tests, and she's like interactive learning. So she's pretty fun. But she translated the New Testament from Greek into English, and eventually the Northern Baptist Convention, which is the precursor of the American Baptists, if anybody knows the American Baptists today, they asked her if they could publish it in 1924, which was the 100th anniversary of their publishing house. And so it's called the Centenary Translation. I have one. Hold on. It's this little guy. That's hers. And see, it's very small. And she asked for it to be small on purpose because she wanted it to fit in your pocket or your handbag. She writes that. And this is her. It's still like she's not the only woman who's published her own translation of the Greek New Testament, which people still think she is. That's not true. She's the first woman who a denomination, so this was representative of the denomination in 1924, it's really surprising. It's a super complicated story. It's really surprising. So Sharon Dowd had studied Helen Barrett Montgomery, and she got me interested. And I decided I want to write a book on her translation and the interesting choices she made in this translation. And so I published a few articles on that. Like, how does she understand the woman caught in usually woman caught in adultery, but better woman saved from stoning in John, things like that. But Mandy McMichael and I are writing a book on Helen Barrett Montgomery's translation of the New Testament and setting it in the time of really the early 20th century, and like all the way that it fits this mode of Baptist missions, but really what some of your listeners will recognize as evangelical missions, like the idea of like we're taking God to the people over there, and so the varieties of ways that is really just a like act of colonization and spreading of American imperialism, and also like spreading of a white supremacist understanding. She doesn't know that's what she's doing because no one's forced her to recognize that, but it is what she's doing, and a very particular understanding of womanhood as well. So she sees the gospel as an instrument of democracy and civilization. So she's like, women should be involved and women should do these things, and it should look like this.
The name of that book, by the way?
Our book? Oh gosh, I can't even remember. Is it terrible? We've not gotten it done yet. I think it's Helen Barrett Montgomery's Bible.
Okay.
But it may change. It'll be out with Oxford University Press at some point. But it's a work in progress. But she's a riot. Sometimes she'll do something like that is amazing and like super inclusive and really like life-giving, not only for women, but for all people everywhere, because she's anti-eugenics. Low bar, y'all. She does cross it, right? Like she does not, she's resisting some really racist stuff in her day. She's still racist, but she's not as bad as she could be. But looking at her helps us understand better where Protestant Christianity is today and the different choices that evangelicalism has taken subsequent to her, and to women like her from that time period.
Interesting. Well, we look forward to getting that out into the world and having you on maybe again when that comes out.
With Mandy, that'd be great.
Yeah, that would be great. So we just want to say thank you, Alicia, for all that you've contributed to biblical studies, in particular New Testament studies, and just the force that you are and all the good work that you're doing and the mentorship that you're doing to raise up a new generation of biblical scholars, in particular female biblical scholars.
100%. Yes.
Yeah.
Thank you all go ahead, Alicia.
I'd say it was hard to leave Campbell, but it was like, this would be a chance to train scholars at Baylor. So
you are making your imprint for sure.
Absolutely.
Thank you all for joining us for Bible Divas. Thanks.
This has been another change-making conversation from Baptist News Global. The episode you've just heard is part of a special podcast series called Bible Divas. Be sure to follow BNG daily at baptistnews.com. and subscribe to get notifications about future episodes. Baptist News Global is a national nonprofit news service that is independent, free, and faithful. B&G is supported by readers and listeners like you. Learn more at baptistnews.com.
This episode was produced and edited by Mac Bowles of TKG Communications, LLC, Dallas, Texas.